Okay, how's everyone doing this week? All here, all present. Our phones are off and our DAS is on, hopefully. It's no coincidence that two things work together. Zeh לעומת זה, זה כנגד זה. זה קם וזה נפל. Take a moment to think why you're here, what you want by being here. What are you looking to find for your mind, body, heart, and soul? So we began with a little introduction last week. There's a story my wife reminded me of that fits well as a brief reminder of our little introduction. It used to be in the times of the Baal Shem Tov, the Baal Shem HaKodesh. It used to be that when there was a Eis Saral Yaakov, a time of suffering, of challenge, when there was some din on the Jewish people, some great calamity that they sensed was about to happen, or politically they saw about to occur. The Baal Shem Tov had a special mahalach, a special technique, a special way of dealing with this. He would go to the forest, and there was a very special place, a very heilige place, a very holy place that only he knew where it was. And in that part of the forest, in that little corner, he would light a very special fire with certain kavanas, with certain intents, spiritual intents. And when he was in that place and he lit that fire, then he would pray a certain prayer. There was a special prayer he used to pray using certain names of Hashem. Only the Kabbalists understood, knew how to do it. And lo and behold, whatever terrible atrocity was coming, disaster was heading towards the Jewish people, it would vanish, it would cease to be, a miracle was done, and that's what would happen. In the times after the Baal Shem Tov, when he was no longer on this earth and the true depth of his ways were no longer in this world, of course, he had students, Baruch Hashem. The Maggid of Mezrich, one of his one or two main students, when the times arose at the times of the life of the Maggid of Mezrich, and there were certain dinim, certain challenges that were having coming, political or certain things, disease or certain challenges coming, the Maggid of Mezrich, he used to know, he got received in the Masorah where that place in the forest was. He used to go there. But he didn't know how to light the fire. The Baal Shem Tov had a special way to light the fire. So at least the Maggid of Mezrich used to go to the place. He couldn't light the fire, but he knew the prayer. He used to say the prayer, and he used to say, Hashem. He used to begin by saying, I'm in the place. I don't know how to light the fire, but I know the prayer. At least the place and the prayer should be enough. In the times after the Maggid, one of his Talmidim, of Moshe Leib, of Sasov, in the times was challenges arose for the Jewish people, with Moshe Leib of Sasov, he used to know where the place was. He didn't know how to light the fire. He didn't know what the prayer was, but he used to go to the place. He used to say, Rabboni Shel Olam, I'm in the place. I don't know that whole shtick with the fire. I don't even know the words of the prayer, but may it just be that it's enough for me to be here. And lo and behold, the calamities would dissipate, would disappear, and a miracle was done. And then it's told, in the times of Yisrael, of vision, the Visionah, the Heilige Visionah, when times of challenges came to Klal Yisrael, he would sit in his study, he would stroke his beard, he would say, Rabboni Shel Olam, I don't know where that place is in the forest. I have no idea how to light the fire. I don't know what the holy prayer was, but at least I have the story of Tzaddikim. At least I can tell that story. May that be enough. And lo and behold, the calamities were averted. Now there's a lot to say here about the power of a story, that a power of a story, a Ma'aser Tzaddikim can achieve, be poil things which are hard to imagine, and one day we'll talk about why, what is the power of the story, what is the power of talking about Tzaddikim, why we can draw their energy and connect to them. It's part of the things we'll discuss in this program together, in this series together. But for now, what I want to say is, unfortunately, for better or for worse, it's also a very good illustration as a story about a kind of Yeridus Adoris that happens. When we try and connect it today to Chassidus, when we try to connect to true experiential, transformational teachings of our tradition, Baruch Hashem, we keep Torah and mitzvahs. Baruch Hashem, we Yirei Shemayim. Baruch Hashem, we do everything we can do. But it was supposed to be that Torah wasn't just a path and dogma of details of information. It was supposed to be that the mitzvahs themselves awakened us to the mitzias of the Eibishter, the reality of Hashem, that we felt that coursing through our veins. We understood Hashem, we experienced Hashem, and we saw miracles, and we had deep, profound understandings, and His Pashtus of Gashmis and Ruach HaKodesh, and all these big, profound words of the properties, the payers of true spiritual mastery and the simonim of true spiritual experience. And today we don't. Today it's hard to access. It's hard to find the teachers, the clarity on this. Yeridus Adoris, whatever we want to blame it on, but we've learned together last week that there's something that happened in the creation in the last 200-300 years, that the spiritual masters taught us, warned us, awakened us to the fact that our souls are changing and the reality is changing and history is changing, and we're in a dawning of a new era where these experiential teachings will return to Judaism, they will return to the world, they will return to Klal Yisrael, and our souls themselves are being prepared for this. And the wisdom of generation is flooding in from all directions, from secular, from Torah knowledge, lahavdil, but there's a melting that's coming together to awaken these teachings. So what we're endeavoring to do in this series is to explore some of the authentic teachings of the original Hasidic masters and trying to awaken some of the experience, trying to understand the depth of how they viewed reality and try and draw ourselves a little to these understandings. As I've said, if you're interested in learning the practical experiences of how to do this practically, Lamaisa, that's what the Elevation Project, the Elevation Mastery Program, the seminars, you can go online and you can check that out. There, we're in a room to teach you how to access them. Here we're exploring the sources and the themes behind that. So I want to begin, maybe this session only, maybe this session, the following session, I'm not sure, we'll see how it pans out. To explore something which I think is very profound. Now, professionally speaking, one of the things I do for a living, is I teach Torah. I have some nice, insightful information to teach, and people feel they're lacking information, so we come together. It's a nice shidduch, and we sit in the same room, and I give out information, people receive information. Most of the time they like it, sometimes they don't, and that's kind of what you do. But we said that what we want to explore, explore the primary teachings of Chassidus, of Kabbalah, of Chazal, obviously everything's coming from the same place, Chazal, is that we are conscious beings, and we live in a conscious world. What does it mean, a conscious world? That means everything we are reacting with and interacting with is real and has its own consciousness. And all of mitzvahs is about how do we affect the consciousness of the physical world. The physical world has its own consciousness. Stone, wood, water has a consciousness of its own, according to mystics. Trees, plant life has its own consciousness. Animals have their own consciousness. Human beings of all varieties have their own consciousness. There are angels, they are higher things in the spiritual world, they have their own consciousness. There are lower things as well. And the goal of what it means to be ultra-orthodox, I say that semi-tongue-in-cheek, but that's really what it is. The goal is to be Torah observant. The goal is to learn to become a Baal Das, to learn to be Balei Das, master of consciousness. The consciousness has multiple dimensions. In the Elevation Project, we learn about 11 dimensions, but for today, it needs the information. It means knowing what everything is. When I pick up the tea, when I make a blessing, what is tea, and what is water, and what is a cup? And when I put on a hat, why do I wear a hat? And when I put on a kippah, why do I wear a kippah? And I walk down the street and there's a tree. Why is there a tree, and why are there trees on the street? And what's the difference between San Francisco and Los Angeles and Israel? Different lands have different aspects of consciousness. Different continents have different elements of consciousness. Where you live, there's a consciousness of the land that informs the consciousness of the people that live there. What's the difference between man and woman? What's the difference between head and heart? What's the difference between sand and sky? What are all these things? So there's the information to learn the information. But more than the information, there's something much more profound, which is the consciousness to connect to these things and shift these things. And it says in the Talmud, it says in Gemara, in the Halacha, the Shulchan Aruch, and it says in Chassidus and Kabbalah, it says in many places, doing the mitzvahs is technically enough, but it's also not really enough. L'chadchila, ideally, mitzvahs tzrichas kavana. That the actions that we do need an intent, they need a consciousness, which is the true transformative element of the action. And when you do a mitzvah with the right intent, with the right consciousness, then we experience supernatural elements in our life. That's what the essence of Torah mitzvah is there to give us. So I want to explore something which I find very fascinating. I want to explore the consciousness of the classroom. Because we think this is a simple transaction of, I have some information, you're going to write down the information as I say it, some of it you like, oh, interesting, I knew that already, oh, that's, never thought of that before, this, they can give out the Shabbos table, nice Devar Torah, and then you leave, and then there's a transaction of information. What happens in the room is much more than a transaction of information. You know, we have a big disease in our generation. The disease is, Rabbi, I can't be there, but I'm going to watch it on Facebook. I just made a lot of people online feel guilty right now. So you should. So I want to explore what the mystics say. Rav Nachman has many Torahs on that. I want to see them on the inside. Otherwise, you wouldn't believe me if I told you what he said. So we'll see it on the inside together. Why, he's asked, why does a student have to come to a class and be there in the transmission of the class? And why is it necessary and far preferred in the spiritual development of the student and the development of the whole of the world, rather than, he says, you know, you hear it from a friend, what did the rabbi say? Or you see it in the Devar Torah, the Parsha sheets come out each week, or you go to Torah at any time. They didn't have it in the days, it's the same thing. Oh, now we watch it on Facebook, live in real time. Why leave my comfy home in my comfy bed, on my comfy couch, to go out and have to schlep around Yerushalayim? Oy, Gavald, I have to schlep through Yerushalayim, right? And why can't I just pick up? Because it's just an information. I can hear Rabbi Katz's information. I can hear the Rebbe's information. I can see the Tzaddik's video on YouTube. The answer is, as I want to explore together in depth, is because there's an interaction, a play, a dance of the consciousness of the people with the room that doesn't just transform your capacity to receive the information, but affects the information itself. And Rav Nachman bangs on the proverbial table and says, you better get in your horse and cart and travel from the village through the forest to go and hear the Rebbe speak. Today, I have to get on the bus. We think that's such a nebuch. I have to schlep across town. I have to wait for the bus. I have to get off the bus. I have to walk 35 seconds to the place. Wow. Lo aleinu. And I'm so comfy and cozy right here on my couch. So I want to teach you what the Tzaddikim say about why it's a chiyuv. If a person's truly interested in to be transformed, they have to go to the class. They have to turn up. Because when you're in the room, there's something that affects the consciousness together. There's three elements, really, and they produce a fourth. The three elements is the consciousness of the teacher, the consciousness of the student, the consciousness of Hashem, if you will. And the third is the information that is revealed through the combination of those three elements. Why do we even have to go to yeshiva and seminary? Look, I watch the stuff online. Rebbe gives a great class. They've been around the world. Why bother going to Jerusalem? Why bother seeing it live? I can watch the recording. Why seeing the movie? I can read the book. Why read the book? I can see the movie. It's all the same kind of question. So I want to teach you how. I want to show you why. And this is not really about me. This is about any teacher that you have. Certainly about Lahavdil, any tzaddikim, rabbanim, gedolim that you're by. You have to go, you have to sit there, you have to be in their presence. And it's about any teacher, really. I'm going to explore. Is anyone in this room, anyone gives over, teaches, shares Torah, or teaches classes? Hands up if you do something like that. On live, in person, that kind of thing. Okay, there's some people out there as well. So, not criticizing, exploring. There is a kind of a teacher who prepares some information, sits in a classroom, gives over the information. You sit there, you pay attention on a good day, you get the information, and there's a transmission of information. There's another kind of teacher that often have more of a following, that being bigger crowds, and that's an external way of looking at it, but internally it's because people are drawn there. There's something powerful happening there. And people like to call it charisma. I still don't know what the word actually means, what it translates as. But there's some people that they have, and sometimes they're tzaddikim, sometimes they're not tzaddikim, they're good yidden. And we call it kedusha. There's something when they speak, there's a transmission much more than information. There's a transmission of essence. Think if you know people like that, rabbis, rebbitzins, people that you know, that you feel that there's something that moves you deeper than the information. It's the emotion. They told the emotional story. Okay, so there's the information, the emotion, but there's something else. And there's something we're going to learn together. There's a transformational effect that happens in real time. And I want you to know that the tzaddikim discuss, we're going to see this on the inside, that there is a kind of a teacher who knows how to teach in a way that transmits consciousness, that has a transformative effect. I want to ask you, the people here right now, hands up if you know, you kind of feel there's certain teachers that do that to you somehow. Hands up, right? Okay, most of the people. What if I told you that's a technique you can learn how to do? The Sforim bring that down. It doesn't mean we're on the level where we can learn how to do it, but I see people in elevation, they have the basic skill set. I know a lot of people have a skill set that they could learn how to do that. The techniques are teachable. And I found that really exceptional teachers that teach, and there's a kind of magic in the room, there's a transformation that happens with individuals, there's a group bonding experience that has. What I found is whether they've read these sources or not, whether they practice these sources or not, what happens is they're mechaven to these ideas. If you ask them what is their process of how they prepare for class, what's their process of what they do 5 minutes before class, 1 minute before class, 2 hours before class, what's in their mind as they're teaching the class, what's the experience like, what you'll find is there's something very profound and in common that they all share and discuss. Any of these things I know for myself. When I read one of these sources years ago, I'm going to show you this week or at the end of this session or the next session next week, I was kind of like, I don't even know what the words the Baal Shem Tov Kodesh was saying here. I kind of looked through it. It was very, very hard. It was about how to use the 7 Sfirat, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchus as you're speaking to give transformative energy to the students, and I just really couldn't work it out. And recently I was learning it with a chavus of mine, and I was staring at the page, and like, this is part of the gift we're going to do. Suddenly the page lit up and I understood exactly what he was saying. Now the reason I understood what he was saying, besides tremendous siyata d'shma, is I realized he's mapping out what I do intuitively on a good day. And when you speak to other high-level educators, you realize they're doing that as well. So I want to discuss this, I want to explore this together. And I want to explore it on the inside. So you see the axioms, the broad axioms behind what they're saying, and then we can go into the details and talk about the elements of consciousness involved in this. Any questions so far? Fine. So let's begin. Now there's source sheets here, they're a bit of a mess. There's some things I'll have in the source sheets and some not. Hands up if you like to watch on the source sheets right now. You're kind of person. Fine, that's enough of you. So good. Let's. I think this one says 65. It's on page 2, round about here, right in the center. So this is going to start in a broad sense, and there's a few axioms we need from this. This is put down in the Amidah Tefillah. The Amidah Tefillah is one of the most profound sections of teaching of transformation and consciousness and extraordinary things that happens in prayer, that happens outside prayer. So much of the elevation curriculum is based on the teachings in there. It's in Parshas Noach of the Baal Shem Tov al Torah. So I want to begin here. Yikavein betefillah shema'oira oisius shenivra'u behem shamayim va'aretz v'chol habruyim kulam elyonim v'tachtoinim kol ha'olames kulam. A person needs to, now this is a lot of discussion what this word means. Yikavein, he needs to fix their intent, to have kavana. Kavana, we give multiple explanations what that means. Kavana means, it means intent, it means emotional alignment, it means understanding. It means a few different things. A person needs to fix their intent in prayer that when you pray, now we're starting talking in prayer, but he's going to expand this out slowly. Shema oira oisius, that you awaken the letters through these letters they were created, heaven and earth. Because the same letters when we read the Torah are the same letters that are in prayer, the 22 letters. And according to our tradition, you can accept, no, this is true because you understand this, because you brought this as dogma. If you don't accept this as dogma, you don't have to understand this yet. There's 22 letters to which all of reality created. It doesn't make sense to most people. What does it mean reality is created with letters? You have to understand letters, according to Kabbalah, are mixes of certain energetic frequencies of consciousness. If you know anything about the 10 energetic primal forces, primal energies through which Hashem created the world, the Sfirot. So each letter, according to the Kabbalistic text, are certain combinations and mixes of the 10 primal energy frequencies through which Hashem created the world. So we have a tradition that says that Hashem created the world with letters, and that needs to be understood, but not for today. And then those letters, those 22 letters that Hashem created the world with, are the letters that we're using when we're praying. And praying means you're in a deeper level of higher consciousness, and you're running those letters through your mind in certain ways. And he says, according to those letters, you're also intending not just to awaken the letters, the primal energetic sources of all of reality, the structure of all of reality, you're also awakening your intent to align with all of the creations in the higher worlds and the lower worlds, in the physical and the spiritual world, and all the worlds themselves. The imkain ba'amu hatafila v'hashvachim hu oime im kol ha'oilamas v'im kol ha'nivriim ki hu ma'oira ha'oisias v'ha'oisias heim achias shel habruim imkain im kulam hu oime. Basically, he's saying that when you say the words of prayer with this intent, because everything in the creation, the physical and the spiritual, is generated from these words, not just generated from these words, not just generated from the letters, in present tense, real time it's being generated. Then what you're doing is you're connecting and drawing down spiritual energy into those primal elements of creation, which causes energy to channel into all the different elements of creation, into the animals, into the doimem sumeya chai medaba, into the what do we say doime means? Don't know how to translate these words. You learn 3 languages and you can't speak any of them. Into the inanimate objects of wood, of stone, of water, etc. Into the plant life, right, etc. All plants, and into trees, and into flowers, and into fruit, and all these elements. And then into all of the animal world. So what you're doing is, as you pray, you begin to pray with the energy of all these things. The kamana, in elevation, we teach a certain meditation, the kamana brings down. And he says that before you go to pray, you should consciously begin to you consciously choose to connect to all the inanimate objects in the world, and then all the plant life in the world, and then all the animal life in the world, and then all the human life in the world, and then all the Klal Yisrael and Tzaddikim and the Shekhinah. And he says, then for you take all the energy of all those things up with you, and you all include it together. Now you can learn how to do that, and it's a very extraordinary experience. Therefore, when you're speaking, you're now speaking with all of the creation. This is also a very profound thing of what it's supposed to be a Jew in the world doing mitzvahs. That means you're a shaliach of all of the creation. You're a messenger of all of the creation. You represent and you're empowering all of the creation. That means you're supposed to care about all of the creation. Every prayer, you're speaking on behalf of the rocks and the trees and the birds in the sky. You're speaking on behalf of every man, woman, and child, every race, color, and creed, and you're taking them up together. And you're elevating up all of the creations, all of the creatures in heaven and earth with this intent. And he says through this, B'nai Aliyah, what we call Balei Das, people who are masters of consciousness, who practice these techniques. If you pray, if you're a master of consciousness and you work and you practice this, and you pray with this intent, then what you're able to do is, this is when he's starting to talk more on the subject we're exploring together, you connect to and bring up the letters That means the spiritual source of the consciousness of even lower level people. People that are not spiritual masters. People that have not mastered their consciousness. People stuck in pain and suffering and fear and down their life. It could be people around the world. It could be people especially empowered as the people there in the room with you. And suddenly those people in the room with you, they're able to suddenly pray with much more intent. They're able to suddenly have spiritual connection, spiritual awakening. And the secret is that when you fix your intent on others, especially those close to you, especially in the immediate proximity, especially those ones choosing to connect to you, then you, through your elevation of spiritual consciousness, can cause an immediate real-time elevation of their spiritual consciousness. And suddenly they're open to experiencing things and achieving things that they wouldn't have the capacity to do in their own normal mind, in their own usual catness and small-minded confusion and pain or suffering, or just their own usual way of going through life. And you return them to good. Suddenly you heal them. Suddenly you cause them to rest. That has a long-term psychological benefit. Baal Shem Tov Gilazeh Gamkein Va'amar leTalmidav Tzarich Atad lehitpalel afilu al oif hapareach hamitzefsef. The Baal Shem Tov taught this principle of connecting to all of the creation, of all of the details, to all of the people, to all of the animals, with the intent of lifting them up. It's called in the mystical writings, his Kashvis, it's also called connection in order to elevate. It's a technique. And the Baal Shem Tov said, you even have to do this on the bird that's flying and chirping past you in the sky. That's what it means to be a Jew in the world. You constantly care, your attention is constantly there, and you're constantly connecting and elevating with all the creation around you. And then he ends on this point, just coming lamaisa to our key discussion, v'chein b'divrei Torah lebnei Adam v'hayhichem moyel kavana zu l'ho'ilam v'hazir b'zeh habei. Now listen very carefully. He says, and this intent is especially important b'divrei Torah, when you are teaching Torah to people. And especially when you're a Rav standing in a shul and you're giving Musa and Teichacha. That means you really realize these people need to change. They're stuck in a certain place. They're going about something the wrong way. Their lives are destructive. And you have an hour with them, half an hour with them, to not just teach them a Devar Torah. I'm going to give you a lesson because I see you're going wrong in a certain area. And I'm standing as a rabbi in front of the community, a rebbe in front of the community, and I have 15 minutes, half an hour, 2 hours, maybe Doniel Katz when he pushes his luck, right? 2 days if I get you into a seminar to try and inform someone with a bit of information. Here's a great insight that should change your life, but it's not enough because people are caught in that kindness, they're caught in the confusion. Even if you say the best share in the best way and the most brilliant insight, people are so stuck in the reality. People don't see information. We always say information. They don't see Torah as a window. They see Torah as a mirror. They reflect it back through their own prism of pain, of suffering, of catness, of small-mindedness, of ego, and they miss the message. So your primary job is to shift their consciousness in real time as you're teaching, as you're sharing. And the Baal Shem Tov says, use this technique when you're teaching Torah. Of course, there he doesn't say what the technique is, but we'll go into other sources where he brings it's brought down as a tradition from him. Questions? Fine. Yes?
Why does it affect more people who are in the rooms than people who are outside the room?
What's that? Because there's a few different reasons for that, and we'll explore that. The question is, why does it affect more people in the room than people outside the room? The answer is it does massively. Just like we learn in quantum mechanics, there's something called the non-local effect, which you can affect everything in the world, but your capacity to affect it depends on its proximity and experience. And it also is affected by their consciousness. And their consciousness also increases in its potency to be connected when people are bound together physically. Yes?
He says that he's here, is that harbe?
What's that?
When he says that he's here, is that harbe? What's the warning?
Be careful to do this. Be careful to use this a lot. Otherwise, what else are you doing? You're giving away the Torah. You think that's what a spiritual teacher is there to do?
You're not doing it.
Yeah.
That's the
Yes.
You said many people don't see Torah as a window, but as a mirror.
Yes.
What does it look like to see Torah as a window?
It means you're willing to climb outside of your own head and your own limited perception of reality and have the humility to explore something you've never thought of before, even if it may mean you are wrong on some of your assumptions, even if it may mean you may need to change in directions you don't think you can or not willing to. Because what we have a habit of doing as human beings is we reframe the things that we're hearing. We're at the selective hearing. I only hear the things that I want to hear, or distorted hearings, which means I'll change my interpretation of what you said, because if I have to acknowledge what you really said and I sense that it's true, that means I have to change things I don't want to change, or admit things I don't want to admit. One of the most humbling things to find as a teacher is when you ask your students, what was in the class I just gave about? It's much nicer when it goes, the class was fantastic, and you don't ask them what I said. It's just like, I'm glad you enjoyed it. But you see the effect on their lives is that people have the humility to reach beyond that, and that people aren't even aware of how we filter things. It's a discussion unto itself. The secret, what I want to say is that depending on your consciousness in real time as a mishpia, as an educator, as an influencer, as a guide, is that you can do things with your mind to open up the people to move beyond that. Now, it takes two to tango to some degree. The greater the tzaddik, the more resistance the student can have, and they can lift them up anyway. For everybody else, there's a connection that happens. Now, I want to begin for 1 second before we go further. Wait, we're going to do one more Torah, and then I'm going to take a side point for a second. Read this next Torah. This is number 66. It's in the top right corner of the same page. This is brought down by the Toldos Yaakov Yosef, Parshas Mishpatim. Coming into the second line. This is what he heard from the tzaddik. When a person is giving, when a Rav is giving over words of Musa, words of spiritual guidance or spiritual rebuke to his students, to the people who live in his town, his city, who he's responsible for, Yireh. Now, we're beginning to learn a little of the practicalities of this. Now, I'm going to be discussing a few different things at the same time. At the end of this mishmash of ideas, we'll try and iron out whose responsibility is what in a classroom, right? So we're going to be talking about what the students have to be doing in real time to access this power, and also what the teacher has to be doing in real time to access the power, right? So now we're still focused from the teacher, the mashpia side. A person will see, the teacher must see, to connect themselves first before they open their mouth. They need to close their eyes. They need to go deep. To enter into what's called Devekus. Devekus is a technique. You can learn it from this realm. You can practically do it. We've taught it to thousands of people. Thousands of people know this and do this automatically without realizing it. Many people don't. But you enter into Devekus, experiencing the light and love of Hashem pour through your veins, of his the knowledge, the awareness that he is there, that you're interacting with him. There's a flow, a level of consciousness. First, you have to do that. Yireh ledabek ulakasha et atzma imahem mitzad ha'achdus ve'his kalalus ki shorish achad lahem leroshei hador im b'nei Irai. Once you connect yourself to Hashem, then you connect yourself in consciousness. These are techniques. You bind yourself to the consciousness of the students, to the students there in the room, to the students listening to the class. It's something called Achdus for his kalalus. That means we are all ultimately one soul. We are all ultimately inter-included together. And we are all not just me to you and you to me and all of us to the tzaddik and all of those kind of things. Not we inter-included together. We are all inter-included within Hashem. But the capacity to access that takes awareness of that as a reality. And it takes awareness with a certain part of your mind, with a deeper inner part of your mind called Das Elyon. Because we all have one root. Our souls are intertwined innately. So the becoming aware of that allows us to connect together, the teacher to the students. And at that moment, when the teacher, the mashpia, chooses to receive extra energy or insight consciously, then they're able to draw that down to the whole of the group that is present. When we do that together, as Hashem alakav imoi, then Hashem becomes with them, is drawn into higher consciousness, the energy of higher consciousness, what's called moichin de gadlus, our minds open together, and they go up, all of them together, ledabak oisam bo yisbarach shemoy. And one person can choose at any time to bind themselves, the mashpia, to bind themselves to Hashem, to bind themselves then to the group, to bind the group to Hashem and choose to elevate them all up. For hu sha'ama bezohar, and this is what it says in the Zohar. Now the basic translation of this term is that he is meritorious, ma'an da'achid, the one that binds himself to the hand of, how do you say, the mechayev, the guilty, the blameworthy. This is the Zohar's way of saying, who is the great spiritual one? Who is meritorious? Who has schus, we would say, bivrit. Schut. The one that is able to bind themselves to the hand of the lower person and pull them up. The oiches biyadam la'aloisam. You grab their hand to elevate them. This is a very profound idea. As an educator, what is your wish to influence the audience? The audience is, I'm giving you a bunch of information. Hopefully it's funny and deep and intelligent, insightful and relevant. And hopefully you'll go home and think about it. Maybe you just like the charisma and the entertainment and you won't. Maybe you'll talk to have a chavusa. Maybe this person that writes out copious notes and does chazar 1,000 times. When does the information take effect? The answer is according to your degree of hard work, of analyzing. What did I think before? What do I think after? How would I apply this to my life? That's how most people think information works. But that's not true. That's why we need to sit by tzaddikim to realize there's a transformational effect in real time. So that's what he says right here. When you do this action, this technique he's teaching us, we're going to learn, it's immediate. There's an effect that shifts in consciousness in real time. We are opened, we are shifted, we are connected. We hear, not just hear, but we hear a hakara v'hagasha. V'chein shamati zeh haderech mamori be'inyan tefillah lahaloisam. And I also heard from my Rebbe that this same technique is not just when you are teaching, this is what you're supposed to be doing in tefillah. We have classes on this in elevation. I'm not going to that now. If you want to learn the experiential stuff, you'll see there. But this technique of connecting to Hashem, 1. 2, connecting to the group, to the tzibur. 3, to then want to draw us all up and to want to draw that blessing down. That's not just tefillah. That's not just constantly as I'm walking down the street making yichudim to all of creation. That's what education is about. That's very profound. It's very profound. Now, I want to take a quick side point. Let's keep going for a bit now. The common questions when I read these Torahs is because I often use the word the Rav of the city or the tzaddik. Okay, this is for tzaddikim, it's not for us. It's not true. It's for every human being, all of the time. Your consciousness is always affecting the reality around you. Your consciousness is always affecting people around you. Whether you like them, whether you don't, it doesn't matter. There's an effect. This is what we call ayin hara. Your negative thoughts about someone can limit that blessing. This is what we call giving someone a bracha, a berkas hedjit. As the Gemara for even a blessing from not a tzaddik, a pashat person has a spiritual power. Tuning into the person, thinking good about them, wanting good for them, giving expression to that has a transformative power. There are many, many tremendous examples of this in Torah and Yiddishkeit. I want to read one to you from Sharei Kavanas. by the Ari HaKodesh, by the Ari HaKadosh. This is a teaching. This is not a Kabbalistic teaching. It is a Kabbalistic teaching from one of the greatest Kabbalists of all time, but he's talking. I want you to listen to what he's saying. He's talking to the Hamoin Am. He's talking to every single one of us. And you should do this, and you should try this, and you should see an effect from this. He says, Koidem sha'adam yesada tefillasa bebeis knesset. When a person's getting ready to pray in the shul, in the minyan meaning the people that are there gathered together. At the beginning of prayer, Mepashas Akeda ve'elach, and onwards. Tzarich shi'kabel alav mitzvahs ve'ahavta l'reicha kamoicha. You have to accept upon yourself the mitzvah of v'ahavta l'reicha kamoicha, loving your friend like yourself, loving your fellow Jew like yourself, loving all of the people like ourselves, that we're all connected together, bonded together. I love all of us. V'yakavein le'ahuv kol echad mebnei Yisrael kenafshay. And I have the intent to love every one of Bnei Yisrael like my soul. Ki al yedei zeh, because through this ta'aleh tefillasa kalula makol tefillas Yisrael. When I do that, when I bind my consciousness to them with love, then I become bound with them, and all our prayers become included together, and they all go up together with extra force, with exponential energy. V'tuchal la'aloit lamala, v'la'asois pri, and you're able to ascend higher together. You and them together. You take their prayers up. You take their prayers up. They take your prayers up, and you all lift up together and create results of your prayer. Ubeprat, especially avas chavevim ha'oiskim b'Torah b'yachad. That there's a great mitzvah, there's a great obligation, there's a great opportunity that when you pray in a group of people, the Siv Shalom discusses, there's a concept called a minyan. There's a minyan, it's a group of people in a shul. Minyan, we say mincha, if you daven, you want to come in, right? But he says there's a panemius minyan. There's a minyan of people that love each other, that care for each other, that are learning together, that are growing together. You may call it a meditation group. You may call it whatever you call it. We call it chabura. Right? And when you pray together, he says, especially people that are growing together, and they automatically have that love, that's a much more potent minyan. That's a much more powerful place to pray. You feel that love and you feel that connection. We'll talk about shortly what is the effect of that. The avos chaverim ha'oiskim b'Torah b'yachad together, surich kol achad v'achad lakalul atzmai ke'ilu hu chava achad min ha'chaverim shaloi. Ke'ilu hu eva echad min ha'chaverim shaloi. You're one of the limbs. It's what's called the koma shalema. You are one of the limbs. You're all one body, one soul together. And you see yourself as being part of the limbs, part of the body, part of the united consciousness of that. When you do that, it creates extraordinary spiritual expansion of consciousness together, and that goes off. B'prat, im yesh lahadam yediya v'hasaga l'da'at l'haker l'chaveru b'bechinas haneshama. When you know your friend so well on a basic level, what he's saying, that you sense their neshama, you know their neshama, you know their essence, and you're in a room of people, and you're all connected on that level, and you're all together in the room, then it expands the consciousness, opens it up. You can choose to connect to Hashem, to connect to each other. You can choose individuals in the room. You want them to have extra chiyas. And especially if someone you know is suffering, has pain, physical, emotional challenges in their life, you can choose through that connection to bring down shefa, blessing, higher consciousness to them. You can choose as a group to focus your energy in one individual in the room. You understand? He's not just talking about tzaddikim, he's talking every single one of us. Everybody knows the famous Rav Nachman in Likutei Moharan, Reish Pei Beis, that if there's a rush or a person who's evil, messed up, in a fallen state, someone that you know, someone hopefully you don't know, but someone who's really fallen, making terrible decisions, highly destructive. And if you choose as a simple, pashat person, not a tzaddik, to find one aspect of good, and a nekuda tova, one element of good, and you judge them on that. They're trying, they're struggling, they had an abusive father, I understand why they're in there, but I say they want to change. That itself will turn them to good. He says very clearly, a normal person, you judge that, you, the normal person, not them, you judge that person favorably, And by your perception of the good with them, turns the negativity itself around to good. Because you connect to them, you are included within them, you connect to Hashem, and you can draw them up. Of course, the bigger tzaddik you are, the more das you have, the more consciousness you have, the more powerful you affect. The more you can work through things that even block people, no one else can get to. You can achieve them. You can affect more people, and in general, you can affect more people in the world. But by tzaddikim, you're going to see, you always have to go to the tzaddik. The greatest power comes to go to the tzaddik. You always go towards blessing, and the more mesiras nefesh you have, the more sacrifice to get there, the greater the power of the effect that they have to be able to affect you. And on a relative level, with Nachman, all of Nachman's teachings work on a mechanism called arachin, which means relativity. That means even if you are not tzaddik yesod olam, the greatest tzaddik in the world, there can be in a room and a group of people, you're the tzaddik there, you're the spiritual guide there, you're the teacher there, and therefore you take on those properties yourself in a small aspect. When you connect to Hashem, when you connect yourself to others, when you connect them to Hashem, then there's a transference of consciousness, a transference of energy. And based on your intent, there's an effect. And based on your intent as the receiver, you can be open to that. But to the degree of sacrifice, you have to go. You have to come to the class. You have to attend in real time. And you're going to see, you have to pray. You have to open your mind to it. You have to choose it. It's something happening from both sides. So even though in future you're going to see some of this, as we look at, they're talking about it tzaddikim. They don't mean only tzaddikim. They mean also tzaddikim, and even more powerfully tzaddikim. But every single one of this, on a greater or lesser degree, has this. And the more we become balei das, the more this is what's happening in a classroom. This is what you have to know and understand. Questions? Yes.
Is it possible for the educator or teacher to give over the message clearly if the audience isn't receptive, like at all?
According to their own capacity of spiritual mastery, they can push through that.
But let's say they don't. I'm saying is it
You ask any teacher in the world whether how the class went. Take the best teachers, the most fantastic, intelligent, deep, charismatic, wonderful teachers. Many times they'll say it was fantastic. Many times they say, I couldn't get it. Why? What's that missing? I know how the jokes are. I know how the class is structured. I know the great punchline. I know this is a great target audience, but I couldn't find it. There were ways to open up a class. There were ways, as a great teacher, you can open up a class, but there's ways we'll learn. In elevation, you see, like, in multiple levels, when people go in, they're learning that we do preparations in the group to receive it, and the class is transformed by that. It's a preparation of consciousness. It's a preparation of attention. It's a preparation of intent. Questions? Yes?
The intent is that you want to share with them your consciousness? I don't understand how it works.
So we haven't talked about what the intent is. One of the intents is that you want to share with them Hashem's consciousness and to get your own consciousness out of the way. There's other intents as well we'll explore. Questions? Yes?
How much does it depend on the teacher and how much on the student?
Well, that's what we said. It's a combination, but the greater the teacher, the greater they can overcome and transform the resistance from the student.
So the teacher is like great.
A great tzaddik can take a rasha, can take a low-level broken person and give them energy and transformation through the power of their consciousness. Right? A lower-level teacher who has some conscious capacity will, also need some energy being generated from the students. I think a lot of things that happen in Lahavdil Al Favdel's rock and roll concerts are also based on that. There's, sometimes you're in a place and the energy is electric. Not that I know, but from another life in the same body, there's a kind of experience, there's a kind of magic, a transmission that happens. Of course, you have to be very careful what I'm saying because we're not really here to talk about this. But the door swings both ways. That means, according to the negativity of the teacher, you can absorb that as well. This can't be emphasized enough. It's not just This unfortunately happens in our generation. I'm not at all here to name names. I'm not all here to talk about negative things, but you should know it's so, so important, especially with deeper aspects of Torah, that you teach, that you choose teachers who are living with integrity to their teachings, that are living with Kedusha and Tahara. Hashem Yirachim, because you are receiving an energetic transmission by that which you look to as a teacher, by that which you look to as a spiritual guide. If they're not living with holiness, if they're not living with integrity, you will absorb the negativity, because the more you look to them with respect, that's called yira. That's part of what it means to come to a class. You sense an awe. You're in the room. You sense, there comes the teacher. You stand, or you do whatever you do for your Rav, your committee, whoever that Rebbitzin is. You're creating a respect. It's called kavod. What does kavod mean? Kavod means respect, but kavod more literally means weight. That person pulls on you. You know, this idea, I always think that when I stand up for a rabbi of mine, it's not just like, I got to respect, I'm supposed to stand up, it's a formality. When that person walks into the room, you're so focused on their energy, you're drawn by them. I always think like kavod means like, you know, the sun has kavod because it has such a mass, a density of energy that the whole universe, the whole galaxy spins around it. So what you're supposed to have for teachers is something called a yira. It's a moira. It's an awe. And when you do that, says the Zohar, says all of Chassidus, the whole concept of yiras Hashem. When you sense awe, then it trains your consciousness. This is very deep. I don't talk about this very much, but we have to talk about this more. I'm afraid to talk about an elevation because some people misunderstand it. The more you fear something, and when I say fear, I don't mean fall in fear. I mean, have incredible respect. The more you absorb the energy of it. When you just have love for Hashem, you don't get the full deal. When you have fear of Hashem, again, fear doesn't mean Hashem's going to beat me up. That's not what it means. It means it's such an awesome awareness of how profound it is and how little I'm not, that my whole being is fixed. That creates, as the Zohar, in last week's Parsha even, a mechanism whereby you begin to draw the energy of it. And therefore, when the teacher walks in the room and you stand up, you sense the awe. This is what Rav Nachman says in the first. You sense the awe. You sense like, wow, there's incredible knowledge, wisdom, spiritual mastery from that Rebbitzin, that Gadol that walks in the room. It tunes your higher consciousness to want to be drawn by that, to want to be drawn from that. When you do that to someone who's not pure, Shem Yirachim. There's the story of the Chazim of Lublin, and he had a student, a great student who was a great tzaddik. And there's a story, I heard this yesterday, I believe it was the Chazim of Lublin. There's an amazing Maisa. My friend Rachman told it to me. Maybe he'll get him online and he'll tell the whole Maisa and all its complexity in detail. But basically, the Chazim of Lublin came to see the tzaddik, and the Chazim of Lublin walked into the room, and then he suddenly took one step and he turned around and closed the door and walked out. And then the tzaddik was waiting for the Chazim to come in, and then the Chazim came in again. He walked into the room 2 steps, turned around and walked out. And the tzaddik couldn't understand what the Chazim was doing. And finally, the Chazim came in again, and he said, "Well, what's happening? What's happening?" Chazim said, "There's a tumor in the room, a very intense negative energy." And the tzaddik was like embarrassed, like, "What am I in my holy place where I learn? I don't." And the Chazal Lublin was one of the most sensitive neshamas ever. Could see like hundreds of miles away, was aware of everything happening. He prayed to have less sensitivity. He said, it's from that sefer over there. And the tzaddik turned towards the sefer, and the sefer is one of the great holy works of our tradition. And the tzaddik said to his Rebbe, the Chazal Lublin, what do you mean? Rebbe, that's... I don't know if I'm trying to remember the normally Melech. I can't remember how the Maisa went. That's one of the. How could that be? And the Chazim Lublin said, "You'd understand. Someone who was a very spiritually impure state opened up the book and read it." And the Chazim Lublin was so spiritually sensitive, he could sense that the energy had been sucked out of it. It's very, very profound. It's very, very profound. So there's a transmission that happens. When you're standing before that teacher, especially people say, well, I don't need Judaism, I don't need the stuff, I can just see any teacher. There's certain New Age spiritual teachers, if you will, certain self-help gurus, if you will, that if you read the information, you can go, oh, that's quite insightful. It's quite insightful, right? But when you look at the person that said to me once, wow, what you said in Elevation was just like that self-help. It's just like a guru. He said, did you read those words? He said, you should read this. It's exactly the same kind of stuff. And I was just like, it's like, what do you mean? What are you afraid? What if I was afraid of this? You want to absorb that ego? You want to absorb that lust that he has? You want to take all that in? Right? It's a reality. Now, you may say, it's nothing. So if you say it's nothing, it's probably because you're not yet sensitized. But everything you want, you're not going to get from self-development guru stuff. It's not the information that's primarily the most transformative. The information is important. It is relevant. You need it. But there's something else you're getting. Therefore, you want to be highly selective of looking through the information. Who is that person? What is the life that they lead? Do they have Yiras Shamayim? Do they have integrity? Do they live and breathe this stuff? Do they have healthy boundaries? Do they have a real Masorah? And is the teacher that you sense when they give over even the Torah? Do you sense depth and humility and holiness in their speech? Or do you sense arrogance and ego and anger in the way they speak? You don't want it, you don't need it. Yeah, but there's the Torah's valid. You don't want it, you don't need it. Of course, you have to be normal and you have to be healthy, and if you get something from it, you take it. I'm talking how to tune in. There's a transmission that's going on which is much deeper than meets the eyes. There's a lot to say. We've said enough. Now, keep listening here. 66.1. I believe it's the second one right over here on the sheets, under what we just read. This is very profound, as opposed to that other stuff we did. The Baal Shem Tov, Al HaTorah, that's the Sefer. Parshas Ekev, Seif Ayin Bet, 72. Shamati b'shem Moiri Zecher Sadik, Zecher Lavach L'chaya Oilam Haba, Inyan his Chabrus Lahaloisai, that's that term. Connection of consciousness to elevate the other. His Chabrus, the connection, Ha'alot, to lift up. Im yesh boy mida echad shavaloi al kolponim az yochal lachavoy la'aloisoi mitzad Gazebo shava. When I learn those words, here's part of how it works, part of how the mechanism works. And you see what the Ariya Kodesh was getting at. The Ariya HaKadosh was getting at. The part of the mechanism to connect to someone is you have to find one thing that you like about them, one thing you love about them, one thing you appreciate about them. That's what creates the energetic resonance, the resonant bonding, as one scientist calls it. And when you do that, im yesh boi mida echad shavaloi, al kolponim, at least one midah that you have in common, one thing that you have in common, one trait that you have in common. That's what creates the resonance. Then he's able to connect to that person and raise them up using a mechanism called the Gazebo Shava. Now, if your husbands were here, their mind would just be blown. You'll forgive me for saying that. Because if your husbands are learning Gemara all day, they know what this thing is called the Gazebo Shava. A Gazebo Shava is a halachic mechanism that is used frequently in the Talmud. And it's almost, forgive me for saying, nonsensical. In fact, by definition, it means it's not done with sense. What it means, that there can be two totally different subjects. One is discussed in one chapter of a Gemara, of the Talmud, and the other is from a totally different part, 10 books later. They're totally different subjects. And we learn one law from one place to another of two totally intellectually disconnected subjects because there's a common word that they have in the line that talks about them. I'll give you a classic example. I was learning this Gemara the other day, so I'll bring it down now. And the first daf, the first page of Kiddushim, What is the mechanism of how a man marries a woman? So there's a discussion. Basically, he buys her, and he owns her. Just so I'd say that out loud, because it's funny to say out loud. All these boos online. If a woman actually knew what that meant, she would swoon how beautiful and profound it is, what it says about her and her talent and potential. If we see it as a window, we'd be moved by it. If we see it as a projection, as a mirror, we're hurt and offended. But your deepest desire for a relationship is what that idea is speaking to. It's another class for another time. And there's a language, so the Gemara is discussing all these interesting ideas. And there's a certain term the Gemara uses, that when a man takes a woman, he has to take her. And the language for taking the woman, it's not like that barbaric, he clubs her on the back of the head and he drags her back to his cave. You know how we do it in yeshiva, right? Meets her in a hotel lobby, then clubs her on the back of the head and drags her back to the chuppah. That's what I learned in the Mir. It's a joke, it's not what I learned in the Mir. I learned to know some math. It says, Gama kicha kicha mesada efron. How do we know that this is the mechanism? The Gemara is asking, is this the mechanism? How does it work? Kicha kicha mesada efron. How do we know that this taking, or is it an acquisition? In another place it uses the language of kinyan. How do we know that this is how it works? So the Gemara explores this idea of kicha. So it says, Gama kicha kicha mesada efron. Because kasiv hacha, because it says, ki yikach ish isha. The language that the Torah uses, the pasuk from the Torah, when it says a man will take a woman. Ki yikach, when he will take the woman. And then it says hasam there, when Abraham, now this is if this doesn't make any sense to you, that's exactly what a Gazebo Shava is. When Abraham was buying the field to bury Sarah in, right? Total non sequitur. V'nasati kesef hasada kach mimenu. Here, I'm giving you the money for the field. Take the money from me. How do I know that the mechanism that makes marriage work is a purchase and an acquisition? Because when Hashem says you should marry a woman, it says take her. Ki yikach, when you take. And over there, where else, the Torah says, where else do we see the word kicha, right? We see Abraham says, here's the money, take it from me. Right? So therefore, our sages say, oh, it's obvious. Isn't it totally obvious that just like you buy a field, now you know you buy a woman. Shir hamalas b'shir. That's the end of the Torah. Did you like that? That is a strange mechanism. That means you take a halachic reality from one place and you project it into a halachic reality in another place, only because it randomly uses some of the words to describe that. But that's nonsensical, exactly. That's called a Gazebo Shava. A Gazebo Shava means, was that?
It's not random.
So it's not random, okay? So there's deep, incredible Torahs and Kabbalah and Chassidus, and from our greatest sages teaching about what it means that a woman, Isha Doma Lakaka, a woman is like land, haven't purchased land, because what's land, without going into the details, you can begin to use your imagination, because there can be a seed, and the seed contains an apple tree, and the apple tree has 100,000 apples, and in those apples are 1 million more apples. So the seed has everything, but of course the seed has nothing until you plant it in the land, and the land means the earth, the ground, which is a place that nurtures, that manifests things, that takes the potential and turns it into realities. That the ground is the Adam, is the Karka, is Adam, Adama, which is the essence of man, which is to create a place in this physical world, a Dira B'Tachtoinim, where Hashem's blessing, Hashem's seeds can be planted and grow up to much more. There can be potential, which is the seed, but the woman represents the potential to turn the seed into reality, to nurture, to give it the nutrients, to give it to the love, to be a womb, to be a home, a bias, a vessel to receive and develop. And that's what the land does. But now when you look back at it, you understand that. But where did that mechanism come from? It came from a Gazebo Shava. A Gazebo Shava, I like to call, in scientific terms, is basically a wormhole. It allows something to go from one side of the universe immediately to another side of the universe and transmit the energy and consciousness and ideas, spiritual ideas, from one place to another. So the Baal Shem Tov is teaching an amazing idea that when you see something in common in the person, right, then you have an instant transmission of consciousness because of it. That means your spirit, if I'm in a state of devekas and I'm connected to Hashem, and then I look at another person and I say something that I love, something that's in common, something I'm resonating with, I create a mechanism, and then your spiritual properties, your halachic mitzias reality, your spiritual consciousness, then moves through that wormhole and becomes manifest and awakened within them. You hear how profound that is? Of course, the Yud Gimel Midas, these 13 mechanisms that we use intellectually to analyze the Torah, from which we draw out halach and insight, each one of them, says the Kabbalistic teachings, is a mechanism of consciousness, of connecting the universe. So that's very profound. It's not for today. Today we're just saying, what is a Gazebo Shava? And that's what he goes on to say. If a person is able to connect to your chava and to lift them up, how? Through a Gazebo Shava. If you find one midah in common, then you see the midah in common is like the common line between the psukim. Im yeshlo shivi b'tzad echad. You have one point of commonality between you, right? Gam b'sha'ah hatzadadim eno shavaloi kamosha kasav harambam. Even if everything else, you don't have anything in common, you have to seek that one point of commonality, and then the wormhole is opened and the transmission begins. Masha ein ken kishahu shnei hafchiyim mamash. But the more you see it, this is very profound, it's the us versus them. When you see there's us versus them, Chassidim versus Litvish Chassidim versus the Svardim, the religious versus the secular, the white keepers versus the black keepers, the etc., etc., then what you're doing is you're compartmentalizing human consciousness. That we can no longer flow together energetically, influence each other energetically. The more you find good in people, the more you find good in them, the opposite. You don't have to agree with 99.9% of things. You have to find one nakuda tava, one good insight. You set up a pipeline, a wormhole to begin transmission, high influence. I heard an amazing Torah from Sri Meir Zilberberg. He says, Yeshivim Vivim Oisius the Torah. There's 600,000 letters in the Torah. There's 600,000 root Jewish souls of our people. He says, all of the Torah is embodied in full revelation by the full consciousness of the Jewish people. And just like there's Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Soy, there's multiple levels of understanding of the Torah, multiple dimensions. There's multiple dimensions of different people. There's deeper people, there's more practical people, there's more emotional people, more all kind of different psychological dimensions, different groups. And everybody has their own chelik in Torah. Every one of us has our own chelik in Torah. And different groups have different chelakim in Torah. So the Chassidim have more experiential, spiritual side. The Kabbalists have the quantum map. The Talmudists, the halachic elements, they have theirs. The Darshanim have drush, right? The Kippur Sukkah Chevra, they have the love of Eretz Yisrael and Yeshiva Aretz. Yes, but don't we all have them? Well, we all have them to some degree, but some of them really dedicate their time and their energy, the focus of that. But ultimately, we want to connect to all of Torah. Ultimately, you want the shleimus of Torah, the expansiveness of Torah. You want the depth, you want the insight, you want the practicality, you want the Yerushalayim, you want Eretz Yisrael. You want to connect to them all, right? We want to draw that. We want to be full, perfected, expanded spiritual consciousness beings, and therefore we have to connect to all the parts of Torah. I heard from the Tzaddik of Sri Meir Zilberberg Shlita, he says when a person chas v'chalila speaks lashon hara about a certain group, they cut off their capacity to connect to that part of Torah. You speak lashon hara about Kabbalists, you can no longer access the energy. You can learn the information, but you don't get the energy behind it. You speak bad about the people that love the land, you no longer can draw from the energy of the land. When you see good in each group, good insight, value, you set up profound spiritual channels of influence, of connection. You give and you receive. That's happening in real time. You have to find your enemy and you have to find something to appreciate, some value they contribute, and that allows influence on superconscious level, on a superconscious level. You don't just cut off capacity to get their Torah, you cut off your capacity to contact that consciousness within the Torah. Even if you go and learn that part of Torah, again, you can get the information, but you don't get the chiyas, the energy, the flow, the shepherd, the transformational effect. That's what he's saying. Is this interesting to anyone? Is anyone getting anything from this? Questions? Yes.
What is the connection between this class and last class? Between the different consciousnesses that we have within us?
So the last class was just an introduction to exploring these teachings. Now we're beginning to explore some of these teachings vis-a-vis the interconnectivity of all things. And how that affects the path of education, the classroom experience. That's all. I'm sure you have a deeper mind and you can weave lots of wonderful things together, and you're welcome to the Simcha Rabba. Yes?
How do you clean the pipelines in this the state of the Jewish people as we are now? How do you clean that energy in order
You have to do
be able
tshuva. We all have to do tshuva. Tshuva is how we clean the pipelines. Working through my emotional blocks, my physical blocks, working through my belief blocks, aligning myself with the Ratzon Hashem. Part of the word kavana means alignment. The more I'm osik and averas, the more I'm doing wrong things, not living with integrity, going against the Devar Hashem, the more I am disconnected from the source. The more I am resonating with the Ratzon Hashem in soul, mind, heart, and body and actions, the more I become a clear, pure channel. The more I am not, the more I am blocking the channels, both to my own capacity to access spiritual wisdom and knowledge and energy and consciousness and capacity to affect other people as well. Tshuva, 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 tshuva. Yes? Question?
So, how do you balance that with the last thing you just said? Obviously, talking about like some scientists and talking about a group of Jews is a different thing, but let's say the 99% that you don't agree with them, you don't want to get influenced by those.
I'm not looking at them with awe. I'm not looking at them with jealousy. I don't want to get, but I want to care and love. I want to know that they're connected too.
But the wormhole effect goes also to that their broken parts, or it's just their...
Again, it's on what your consciousness is. I have this images in my mind. I don't know if this image answers your question. It's a very profound image that stuck with me for many years. I think it's somehow connected. Be careful what I'm saying. I'm online. It's going down on my permanent record. There's this wonderful family I know in the Old City. I personally would never choose to bring up children in the Old City. People say it's close to the Holy of Holies. I personally think it's the Disneyland of Judaism. I wouldn't bring up my kids in Disneyland either. It's a 24/7 tourist attraction. There's one family I know, a very lovely, wonderful family. They chose to do that. And they had a girl that was growing up. I remember one time when I was living in the Old City, I was walking down the street, and it was the middle of summer, and there's all kind of people dressed in all kinds of ways. And I remember walking in a certain place, I know I was in the arches when you're walking through the Rava, plus all the restaurants, and I looked up, and there was a young man and a young woman, not so sneeriously dressed, physically embraced in a very intimate way, looking in each other's eyes, caressing each other's eyes, and I was just walking by, and I looked up, just because your eyes wandered, and I saw it, and I didn't want to see what was there, and I quickly darted my head around the other way. And as I quickly darted my head around the other way, I'll never forget what I said. And this is a very big story about nothing at all, right? And what I saw was, there was this girl, she's like 12 years old. I know her family, comes from a very wonderful, special family. And I don't know what's going to happen to these children, but I remember the look in her eyes. She was hiding behind these arches, behind this pole, right? This sweet, holy girl. And she was staring at them with such awe. Such like, wow, they have this such romantic love. And they're so cool. And she was like, and I remember just feeling, never. Because that's the way you look at something when you yearn for that thing and you want that thing and you draw it into you. When you look at things out there in the world and you say, they have a value, there's a contribution, there's certain insights, that is valuable, that is not valuable, that's okay, that's a tikkun. You can do yichudim, you can get something from it. When you look at something like, they have that and I don't, then you start drawing that into you. That's with anyone, with anything. What you are in awe of, you will absorb. Most of us don't have the power of awe. We're bored, we're unimpressed, we're unmotivated. Great people have awe. One of my Rosh Yeshivas, or one of my yeshivas, I remember, he said he learned one time, he had a chavrusa with a certain Adam Gadol, a certain great master of the Talmud. And he said, he told us this one time in a Musa class, I love this story. Again, big story about nothing at all, right? He said when he would learn with Adam Gadol, this master of all of the Gemara, he said we would be learning in them, and they're sitting in the Gemara, they're looking at the page together. When the Adam Gadol it was a bit hot for him, he wanted to take off his jacket, he would get up and leave the room and take off his jacket and then come back. And the Rosh Hashanah at the time asked him why. He said it's not appropriate to take off your clothes in front of the holy Gemara. It's like what is that, exposing of yourself? And which page of the Shulchan Aruch is that on? Is it Mishnah Berurah? Who brings that down? You know where it's brought down? Nowhere. It's brought down in a deep sensitivities of the soul. It's called das, or Volby would say. That you sense things because of the depth of them, even though it's not said anywhere. You can say, that's so silly, these religious Jews can't take off their coats and can't say, yeah, you can dismiss everything. You can disconnect from that spirituality, disconnect from everything. But there's an awe that you have. So the mystical writings would say, when you have that awe, and then you look at the page, you draw profound insights that nobody else saw there. A man should have awe for his wife. A wife should have awe for their husband. When you have awe, it's not just that you respect them a different way and you treat them a different way. There's a conscious interconnectivity between the two of them. That means you share not just love and not just insight and not just caring and not just respect, but there's a psychic bond that develops. Now listen to this. With Nachman, Rabbeinu. There's two tours, I think, are on the other 2 pages here. We don't have much time left. We started late, we're going to go a little late, and then we're done. This is in Likutei Eitzos, in the section of Talmud Torah, Torah number 24. It's such a profound sefer. I'm amazed people don't learn this more, don't teach this more. It doesn't matter if you're Breslov or not Breslov, Hasidic or not Hasidic. This sefer, Likutei Eitzos, is one of the most profound books on consciousness and psychic ability and interconnectivity of all things and how to develop your mind, heart, and soul and achieve profound spiritual practical experience. It's amazing. The English translations don't even come anywhere near to doing it justice in a practical, experiential way. Bezrat Hashem, one day we may get around to translating. This is part of the Elevation Publishing. But for now, look at these 2 Torahs. Kishamit palel koidem hadrush tzurich lehitpalel b'tachanunim. Rule number 1: when you're a mishpia, when you're a rabbi, a rebbetzin, a teacher, a therapist, it's all the same, coach. You are there to shift the consciousness and elevate the students, the clients, the chevra, the chabura, the talmidim. You pray before you begin. Not just religious prayer. Deep consciousness, devakas, connection. It has to begin with a prayer. When you pray before you give the Devar Torah, you have to play with pleading, by pleading to Hashem. V'yavakesh me'et HaKadosh Baruch Hu matnas chinam. You say with tremendous humility. It's not because this class shouldn't be great because I'm a brilliant Talmud Chacham, because I'm a big tzaddik, because I want to blow them away. It's not because I've worked really hard on my spiritual development. It's a matnas chinam. Despite my loneliness, and even if I work to the edge, it's still nothing compared to what it takes to merit to inspire one group of people or change one person's life. It's a matnas chinam. Hashem, give it to me for nothing. V'lo yidleb is a chus atzma. It's got nothing. It's not dependent upon my own personal merit. Rak ya'amoid lifnei Hashem yisbarach kadel uchvash, like a poor beggar. You stand before Hashem like you've got nothing, and you plead to Hashem to draw down some light and some value, despite yourself, to these good people. And you find that point of the vagus where you're connected to Hashem, and you find that capacity to that point of goodness within them. Gam tzarich lekasha et atzmai im neshamas hashomim. And then this is before now, and you consciously choose to connect yourself to the people listening. Va'az tefillas rabim she'eno nemeses. And then, when you connect yourself to the cheva, in any educator, in any therapist, in any coach, then it's tefillas rabbim, because now you're born, like the Ariya Kadosh said. The Ariya Kadosh said that you connect to everyone in the room, right, when you go to pray, and now there's an energy that's created by the group, and that all consciousness goes up, and it brings down incredible blessing and insight. But us tefillas rabbim she'eno nemeses, and then Hashem is not just one person praying, that some revelation comes to a class. A class is a vessel for revelation. A class is not a place to give over Devar Torah you heard. It's not transmission of information. It's a vessel for revelation. So you have to prepare your combined consciousness. And when you all connect on that, when the tzaddik connects, when the mashpia connects, when the rav connects, when the yid connects to everybody, and then you have the combined energy. There's an exponential connection of everyone's consciousness, which allowed. That means that the mashpia, the teacher giving it over, connects to the people in the group when he or she goes to pray, and that comes up and that empowers the spiritual energy that can be given over. V'nit kabelis b'vadai, and then for sure when he connects to others, for sure then that prayer is answered. Va'az yesh l'chol achad mehanimsiyim sham chelik b'hatorah. Now this is the final thing I want to discuss tonight. When the mashpia, the teacher, the educator, the coach, the therapist does that, by connecting themselves to Hashem, connecting to the students, connecting to the listeners, it creates a combined, catalyzes group consciousness, which allows that spiritual energy to go up. And therefore, now he's beginning to say a deep secret, therefore, the consciousness of the student, combined with the consciousness of the teacher, and everyone combined exponentially, one after the other, transforms what will be revealed during the session itself, during the class itself. Versteht? You understand what we're saying? However, you get it. And he says here, I am Tzaddik Ois Lamed Bet. So let's go to Tzaddik Ois Lamed Bet. That's also on the sheet. This is number 2 here. It's on this page, if everyone sees. Here we go. Lamed Beis. Listen to this. This is very profound. Now the responsibility comes back to you, Cheva. Yesh chiluk. Everybody listening online, you ready? Every single one of you. Yesh chiluk gadol. Bein haloimei betoich sefer, or bein hashamei mepi hatzadik ba'atzmai. There is a massive difference between someone that reads the Torah, hears it online, etc., and someone who hears it coming out of the mouth in real time without any mechitza of online, any technology, any book, but hears it in real time from the direct mouth of the teacher. Yes, Rav Nachman said tzaddik, but when Rav Nachman says anything, it's bechinas arach, and that means it's relative in the system. And if you don't understand or believe that, I've already brought you many sources that just say a normal person's consciousness effects. And many people understand who go to teach, high-level teachers, basic-level teachers, People that have never taught in their life, and they stand up in front of a group to say something. Maybe you're on a birthright trip. Maybe you have to give a devato at your table. And you know that feeling where suddenly you're lit up and suddenly something's coming through you. And it sounds much more brilliant and clever and profound than even when you prepared it in your head. And you're like amazed at what came out. Hans, maybe you've had that before in your life. Right. When you turn on to care to another, and you focus on making a difference, and you tune and sensitize yourself to them, even the little thing which you kind of hope would be significant but knew wasn't, suddenly becomes electrified. And you feel something is not coming from you, but being spoken through you. And if you experience that in your own life, aha. Yesh chiluk gadol bein haloimed b'toich sefer, or bein hashamei mepiyat tzaddik ba'atzmo. You have to hear it from the mouth in real time, present in the space. Ki hashamei mepiyat tzaddik ba'atzmo, the person that hears it from the mishpia, from the teacher, from the educator, from the spiritual master. Bavadai niskasher nishmaso im nishamas tzaddik. It creates his kashrus. Spirit to spirit. There's a spiritual bond that takes place in real time. Especially when you were there and present. B'sha'as tefilasa shehitpalel koidem shehimshech haTorah. B'vadai, now let's break this down. B'vadai nitkasher nishmasa im nishmas hatzadik b'sha'as tefilasa shehitpalel koidem shehimshech haTorah. When you go to the class, he says this also in another Torah above. When you go to the class, the sacrifice, the Mesiras Nefesh, the getting on the train, getting on the bus, the paying of the money, the wasting of the time, the having to leave early, the having to put something on, to having to go out, to having to cancel that comfort zone, to move your body, that creates will. Why are you going? Because there's something I want to learn. That's drawing down energy. And then I want to go there, I want to think what it is. That's bonding with the Mishpia who's praying at that moment to draw down that insight, to draw down that knowledge. And they all start bonding together. It's the power of the combined will of the individuals, of the teacher, of the student. That's like a prayer. You're getting off the couch, you're putting on the clothes, you're spending the money, you're schlepping across town is a form of a prayer. It's a form of a will. I really want it. That combines with the consciousness of the teacher because we're all focused on being there, of experiencing, of drawing down that insight, of drawing down that blessing, right? And then he says, Koidem shehim shicha Torah. Listen very carefully. When Rav Nachman uses the word with the prayer, this is what he wants to say. That combines, your consciousness combines with the teacher's consciousness during the prayer that the teacher has before he teaches the Torah, right? But look at the word Rav Nachman uses when he says, when he teaches the Torah. He doesn't say, that he's lilmoid. He's not teaching the Torah. He's mamshich the Torah. You draw down the Torah. There's a revelation. It's the prayer that he has before he begins to draw down the information. What do you mean, draw down? He's prepared a class. Yeah, but I've heard from many tzaddikim. I heard from Rav Rumpel. He told me when I started to teach, I was teaching in Asia 1,000 years ago, and I used to go manic and crazy and anxious, preparing hours and hours and hours of the Torah, and amazing stuff would come through on a good day, and sometimes I felt too anxious and I would block or whatever. And Rav Rumpel sent me, I went to see the tzaddik, and the tzaddik member has Ruach HaKodesh, like very crazy stuff. And he's talking about one thing, he's talking, and he just stops, and he looks like this, and he looks back at me, and he says, you know how I prepare for a class? It has nothing to do with what he's talking about. And he starts telling me how he prepares a class, and he goes through this whole thing, and I was like, oh, that's so weird. That's how I prepare for class. He said, I know, but this is what you have to focus on. You get it? And I said, yes. And he just cuts back to the other thing he was saying. And the basic thing he said is, don't stress. Because if you notice in all your best classes, the thing that comes out is much more interesting and often not exactly on the point of the thing that you prepared. He says that's a good sign. Because if you prepare like a robot what to say and you say it over, you weren't being mamshech anything. There was no revelation. It was just information. So he said what you do is, if you just look at the sources and understand them and think about them, right, you see, then what you're doing is you're connecting to the channel above. And then you'll see you've done that. That's sufficient. And then the flow will begin. And the Baal Shem Tov is very explicit about what to do. But let me go back to this. And therefore, when you get off the couch and you go to the class, You hear me, Chevra? When you attend and you are there with Mesiras Nefesh and you go and you sit there and you want it and you sense the awe and you sense the room and you see the teacher and you have the experience, all of that is tuning your mind and it's all combining together in our group prayer, our combined will. That's what prayer is. It's combined will and the potency of that. It goes up and therefore your presence and your intent transforms the transmission. The revelation is brought down according to your will and the things that you particularly want or most need to hear. You ever had it before? I heard a lot. When you go to the teacher and the teacher says exactly that thing. Many times I get emails, people say to me, that's exactly what you said. How did you know? And the answer is, I've been watching on Facebook for the last 2 weeks. I knew exactly the thing to say. Not really. The answer is because when that person comes and they're struggling, that's a prayer that goes up and it causes the teacher to receive it. When you come and you attend and you focus and you want and you think and you combine your consciousness and the teacher doesn't have to be a tzaddik, it has to be someone that cares, that's open, that's connected, that's pure, that's working on themselves, then it creates a connection and there is a reception. Once there's connection, there's reception. And then you, the student, transform that which will be revealed. Therefore, if you stay at home, therefore you say to your friend, what did he say? What did she say? You're going to get this locked-in piece of information. When you intend, the information will come through for you and for the group. When everybody's going and they're coming together and then the Spirit is praying, it awakens tremendous spiritual energy above. And the more, he says, the more people that attend the class, the more of the combined energy goes up. And it creates and it creates in the heart of heavens a tremendous spiritual energy of combined ratzon, combined intent, and it brings down profound insights that will be channeled through by the teacher. It all goes according to the majority of consciousness of the people that attend. You see, it's an organic, real life experience. Not, I prepared some information, here's the information, I wrote down the information, thank you for the class. Your capacity to be aware in consciousness, the teacher's capacity to be aware of consciousness, is a real life experience that's transformative. Ken Yota Kedusha Sarah, Gam, and he also says, not for now, Gam, Kol HaNashim HaOimdim B'Shasas HaDrush Nichna Rishasam Al Yedei HaToiv Shebachachim HaDoiresh, according to the holiness and the goodness within the person giving it over, it can affect you, the student, in real time. It heals when you stand before a real tzaddik, a real great spiritual master. There's something that happens that transforms you just by being in their presence. It takes you out from the side of negativity. You enter into holiness. And the Svarim say, Rav Nachman says, when you enter into a state of holiness because of the group and because of the teacher and because of the connection, not only do you bring through new ideas because of your presence, right? But also it knocks you into a higher state and the information goes in deeper because of your presence. Not only is the information transformed, you're in that open, clear state where it allows you to be affected in real time, as the Baal Shem Tov was saying. In summary, these primal Hasidic teachings on the subject are teaching us that when we are conscious beings and we come to a class, we need to be conscious that this is an organic, live, conscious experience. There's a transmission at play, and we are connecting to each other. We are willing to be there. Sacrifice, awe, respect, caring, finding commonality between the group. These are things that open us up collectively and as individuals to this being a wholly elevated experience. A classroom, teachings, to be Mambit's Torah is a wholly transformative experience with the information and much more the information, but it involves the combined consciousness of the group and a respect of awe of what this experience is. This is a connected, elevated vessel combined together where we allow something greater than the sum of our parts to be received. That's what it means to be a father and a mother in a house. Your whole life is transmission. And profound things come through when you align together in that state. This is what it means to be a therapist all the time, every day. Great therapists really tuned in have much more of a transformational effect often by their presence than individual techniques that they're doing. Of course, the techniques are of value, unless they're not, and many aren't. But the consciousness is profound if you know how to access the state. There's many applications to this. Any questions before we conclude? Yes?
What happens when the other party isn't open to any form of connection?
The other party not being open to a form of connection can block connection. A, or B, according to the mastery of consciousness of the mashpia, of the influencer, there are ways that they can get around that, depending on the Ratzon Hashem, depending on their own mastery, depending on their knowledge and skill set. Right? Sometimes they can't, sometimes they can. Depends. Quite a few factors. Yes?
In terms of educator, how do you know if you're capable of being an educator?
How do you know if you're capable of being an educator? If you have something interesting to share and you care about people, give it a go. That's how I got into this business.
You don't have to self-evaluate a lot?
Self-evaluate. As an ongoing educator, you have to give it a go. You know, as they say, if you know Aleph, teach Aleph. Right? You have to, the two things is you have to have something to share and you have to care. Okay? Doesn't mean you'll be a good educator because you may be lacking a lot of skill sets. But this whole thing about how do I know if I can be an educator? You're an educator every day of your life in everything you're doing. So, you have to get in front of a group, a small group, one person, you have to share an idea and you build a skill set. There's a time in my life when I thought I'm going to be one of the best teachers in the world. Right? And no one ever hired me to teach or asked me to teach anything. I was very upset and disappointed. And I realized because I've never actually told anyone I'm a teacher, it's just in my head, I think I could do this really well. Right? And of course, when I actually stepped in front of the group, it was terrifying. My whole body was like, oh, get me out of here, right? And you try it. And the first time I really stepped in front of a class as a teacher, it was possibly the most powerful experience of my life, one of them. And I remember coming back to the person that threw me in front of the crowd, and I was shocked I couldn't speak. And he said, how was it? And I think I said, I think I waited all my life for that moment. Because it was a place where I kind of felt every different dimension of who I had kind of came together and made sense in that platform. But that's, Gadlus Rishon, that's a moment of inspiration. And then you realize there's a whole craft here of things you have to learn, you have to try, right? Some people get struck by lightning, it's wonderful. And some people, they start low and they need to improve it, right? It's like any craft. You refine and you get better. Unless you're me, and then you get worse for some reason. I don't know why, right? But anything is possible. How do you know it's worth playing the games? You try. You have something interesting to say, and you care. But people have interesting things to say, and they don't care. It's a problem. Some people care a lot, they've got nothing interesting to say. It's also a problem. So we should have a bit of both. Any final questions before we conclude? Yes, ma'am.
Sometimes I just hear the voice of a Rebbe or a Rebbe saying, I'm not even paying attention, or I can't pay attention because I'm busy doing something else. But still, just the voice gives me a tremendous sense of peace and calm. And something about that, what is it?
That's exactly what we're saying. When you have a kesher nafshi to that person, when you've got teachings for them, when you've looked into their eyes and received advice, and you sense the depth of their soul, right? Then we're going to see, the sources say explicitly, just seeing their picture. That's what Yosef Atzadik did to Yaakov Avinu. Just seeing the picture allowed him, right? He imagined he was in a situation of great temptation. He saw the picture of his father. He imagined it. Stigam saying explicitly, you imagine that. And by imagining it, you awaken the soul connection and spiritual energy of that person that floods into your consciousness. And we're going to learn from the Piazetzner, it brings down an amazing thing, that there's certain great sages in the time of the Zohar, and he was trying to paskin halacha. He didn't know whether the halacha went this way or this way, and he imagined his Rebbe, Rabbi Shimon, who was dead, and he imagined the Rebbe, and then he asked the image of his mind, in his mind, of his Rebbe, of the tzaddik, a question, and he received the answer. This is an amazing to know how as a key part of Torah this is. So when we have a connection with a deep spiritual master, by thinking about them, by hearing their voice, by imagining their picture, Rav Nachman says this explicitly, is when we Piazetzner brings us down, about Shem Tov brings us down, when we're learning Torah, we should be focusing on the energy and the face of the teacher. Rav Nachman said it helps us to remember that teaching because it binds us to the source of the teaching, and it awakens secrets behind the teachings. There's people, you see candles on the table here. There's avodas about each candle represents a certain tzaddik, and we think of that tzaddik before we learn that Torah, and it connects us and awakens our connection to that Torah. So hearing a voice or seeing a picture or seeing a sefer, we're connecting to the energy, and from the energy we become a channel. His chavas and his kashvas. Okay, Cheva, hope that was something interesting for you all. Over and out.